At my son's birthday party, my daughter-in-law pulled me aside and whispered, "I'm having your husband's baby, you dried-up crone." I just smiled and replied, "How lovely, sweetheart." A month later, I dropped a bombshell that left her in ruins. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're here to listen. Stay here with me through this whole story and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my stories travel. She thought she'd humiliated me. What she didn't realize is that in her rush to gloat, she gave herself away. Too soon, too loud, and I remembered every word. She assumed I'd stay silent, but I was already listening. So, if you want to see how one venomous whisper unraveled everything she thought she controlled, come with me. You won't believe what I'm about to show you. No one else heard what she said to me. The music was playing, the candles were being lit, and someone was laughing too loudly in the next room. I think it was my brother-in-law. But in that instant, time slowed. Her breath was warm on my cheek. Her words were colder than ice. I didn't flinch. I didn't let the glass I was holding tremble in my hand. I simply looked her in the eye, as if she'd told me the potato salad needed more dill. "How lovely, sweetheart." That's what I said. That's what I gave her. Her eyes flickered with confusion. Just a flicker, barely a crack in her polished mask. She'd come expecting chaos, expecting me to shatter. She hadn't expected composure. She certainly hadn't expected a smile. I watched her walk away, her black hair falling in soft waves down her back, her manicured hand immediately finding my son's arm. He grinned at her like she was the sun itself, and she beamed up at him as if she hadn't just told his mother that the baby in her belly wasn't his. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room, invisible. I've been many things in my life: a wife, a mother, a friend, a hostess, a homemaker, but invisible was new. And maybe that's why she thought she could say what she said. Maybe she thought I was finished, irrelevant, decorative, a piece of lace on a windowsill. She should have known better. I waited for my breath to come back. It did eventually. Shallow, then deep. I walked back to the table and helped my grandson cut his slice of cake. I passed around plates. I made coffee. I laughed when appropriate. My husband didn't look at me once during dessert. That night, I lay in bed beside him, listening to his breathing. Not slow and peaceful like a man at rest, shallow, guilt-ridden. He never asked me why I was so quiet. But I already knew the answer. I stared at the ceiling for hours, my hands folded neatly over my stomach like a woman in a coffin, and I began to plan. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to scream or break dishes or demand the truth like some tragic fool in a soap opera. No. I was going to do what I've always done best: host the perfect gathering, set the stage, and let the real drama write itself. No one else heard what she said to me. The music was playing, the candles were being lit, and someone was laughing too loudly in the next room. I think it was my brother-in-law. But in that instant, time slowed. Her breath was warm on my cheek. Her words were colder than ice. I didn't flinch. I didn't let the glass I was holding tremble in my hand. I simply looked her in the eye, as if she'd told me the potato salad needed more dill. "How lovely, sweetheart," I replied, just loud enough for her alone. And then I walked back into the kitchen, topped off the champagne, and rejoined the party. That night, when the dishes were done and the wrapping paper was bagged and binned, I sat alone at the kitchen table, hands clasped around a mug I hadn't taken a sip from. My husband Patrick was upstairs already, said he was tired from all the excitement. My son Nathan had kissed me on the cheek and left with his wife, who turned at the door to offer one last smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'd seen that smile once before, many years ago, in the mirror of a woman who had just realized her marriage might not be what she thought it was. We'd been married 42 years. 42 years of Sunday breakfasts, joint checking accounts, and long summer drives to nowhere. Patrick and I had met when I was 21, him 26, outside a bakery on Fairview. He held the door for me, I thanked him, and he told me I had flour on my nose. We were married less than a year later. He used to leave notes in my lunchbox, little doodles, short poems, sometimes just a heart and the word mine. He built me a window seat when I said I wanted a reading nook. When I miscarried our second child, he stayed up with me for 3 nights straight, rubbing my back and whispering stories from his childhood to fill the silence. I loved that man. God help me, I still did. Which is why the look on his face at the birthday party gutted me more than the words his daughter-in-law had whispered. He hadn't smiled. Not really. Not at me. He'd stood behind Nathan, arm resting loosely on his chair, and laughed at a joke I couldn't hear, eyes fixed on something in the distance. Or someone. I ran back through the last few months in my mind. The long walks in the evening, the sudden interest in gardening, the password change on his email account, just security stuff, he'd said. I remembered how he'd stopped calling me darling without me noticing. How he used to rub my shoulder absent-mindedly while he read the paper. And now that paper might as well have been a wall between us. Still, a baby? It didn't make sense. Not just the logistics of it, although, yes, I did the math in my head. Patrick was 68. It wasn't impossible, but it also wasn't likely. But it was the why that wouldn't let me sleep. Why her? Why now? Why would the woman my son married lean in close at a family party and drop a grenade into my life? She wanted me to react. That much was obvious. She wanted drama. Fireworks. Maybe she thought I'd slap her, scream at Patrick, shatter a wine glass on the tile. Maybe she wanted to cause a scene that would push me out of the family, out of the house, out of the picture. But I hadn't done any of those things. Because while I didn't know the whole truth yet, I knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. She wanted me to break. And if she wanted it that badly, it meant she was scared of what would happen if I didn't. I pushed back my chair, rinsed out the untouched tea, and wiped down the counters even though they were already clean. Then I turned off the lights, climbed the stairs, and got into bed beside the man I had shared my life, with the man who now lay inches from me but felt miles away. He didn't stir, just muttered something in his sleep and rolled over. I stared at the ceiling in the dark and wondered what else I'd slept through. The first time I met her, she wore white. Not off-white or ivory true white, crisp and bright like she'd stepped out of a bridal catalog. She was introduced as Nathan's friend from his firm, but I knew the moment she smiled that she wasn't there to network. She had the kind of beauty that made other women tense their shoulders without realizing it. Sleek black hair in a high, deliberate ponytail, nails like glass, and those eyes the kind that scanned a room the way a surgeon scans a chart, not for warmth, for advantage. I'd baked apple scones for that brunch. Still warm from the oven, with cinnamon that clung to the air. She didn't eat any, just held her coffee between both hands and complimented our hardwood floors. So classic, she said. It's rare to find families who keep things so traditional. I didn't like the pause before traditional. It lingered like a fingerprint on glass. Still, I smiled, asked polite questions. Where she grew up, what kind of law she practiced. She gave polished answers, vague enough to sound humble, sharp enough to flex status. She made Nathan laugh, though really laugh, the way he hadn't since his last breakup. I remember thinking, maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe I just miss being the most important woman in his life. They were engaged 6 months later, married within the year. And by then, she'd made herself indispensable to him. She organized his calendar, encouraged him to switch firms, told him he was wasting time working for people who didn't recognize his potential. She bought him a new watch for the wedding, a vintage Omega, and said it was time he looked like someone in charge. She pushes me, he told me once. She makes me want more. At the time, I didn't know that wasn't always a compliment. She started calling me Mom right after the wedding, always with that tone that made the words sound ornamental. She'd text me pictures of throw pillows, ask for my brisket recipe, gush about the way I wrapped gifts. But underneath it, there was a strange kind of mimicry, like she was studying me, replicating just enough warmth to pass, but never letting it reach her eyes. She'd invite me to coffee and spend most of the time on her phone, offer to help with the dishes, then disappear mid-dry. She complimented things like my resilience, my grace, my old-school wisdom, all those words that sound generous until you realize they're the vocabulary of extinction. I wasn't being flattered. I was being eulogized while still standing. And Patrick? He adored her, at least at first. She's smart, he said the night after the engagement dinner. Ambitious. You can tell she grew up scrappy. Like you. Not like me. Not at all. I grew up learning to stitch the same hem 5 different ways because buying new pants wasn't always an option. I knew how to stretch one chicken over 3 meals and make it look intentional. Ambition for me meant stability. A warm house. A roof that didn't leak. A son who could study without overhearing arguments about the light bill. Her ambition smelled like something else entirely. Like fresh contracts and passive income, like designer strollers and networking with the right parents at the right preschools. I started to notice how she'd reroute conversations when we were in a group, how she always made herself central, but never obvious, how she'd bring up Nathan's stress levels or overextension just loud enough for Patrick to hear, then stroke his shoulder and say, "I know you worry about him. I do too." She was building something. I just hadn't figured out what, until the whisper. After that night, everything shifted in my memory. Every smile she gave me was suddenly weaponized. Every moment she spent alone with Patrick now replayed in my mind like surveillance footage. A month ago, she dropped off a pie just because. He said she'd stayed to talk about the garden. I hadn't thought much of it then. But now? Now I was sick to my stomach thinking about how he'd laughed as she rattled off questions about soil pH and bloom rotation topics she'd never once shown interest in before. I found a photo on my phone from last Thanksgiving. Nathan carving the turkey. Me pouring wine. And in the background so subtle I hadn't noticed it before she was leaning toward Patrick, her lips close to his ear, her hand on his forearm. His expression was neutral, but not distant. Calculated. Or maybe just tired. I stared at that photo for a long time, wondering if this was when it started, wondering if it ever ended. Because the woman my son married wasn't just a problem anymore. She was a threat. And she knew it. The morning after the party, Patrick acted like nothing had happened. He came downstairs at 7:05, just like always, sat at the table, flipped open the paper, made the same approving sound when the smell of coffee hit him. I plated his toast diagonally the way he liked it and poured him a glass of orange juice that had just enough pulp to pass inspection. "Sleep all right?" he asked, eyes still scanning the paper. "Fine." I lied. "You?" He nodded. "I think the lamb was a little underseasoned, but otherwise, great night." I stirred my coffee a little harder than necessary. He didn't look up. Not once. Not when I sat across from him. Not when I mentioned how late Nathan and Lila stayed. Not even when I said she wore that same dress last month when she stopped by, remember? Nothing. I watched him butter his toast like a man without a care in the world, precise, methodical, completely detached from the earthquake that had gone off in our lives less than 12 hours ago. He couldn't know what she whispered, not unless she told him. And if he did know if they were truly in this together, then the performance he was putting on now was terrifying, because it was perfect. Too perfect. Later that afternoon, I folded laundry in the bedroom while he trimmed the hedges outside. From the window, I could see the top of his head bobbing behind the rose bushes. Gardening had become his new obsession. Said it cleared his mind, gave him peace. I used to think it was harmless. Now, I couldn't look at a prune stem without wondering what secrets were buried beneath it. I watched him talk to the neighbor briefly, wave politely, then kneel to adjust the sprinkler heads. He moved like a man with nothing to hide. But liars do that, don't they? They stick to routines. They show up on time, they cut the toast just right, and they look you in the eye unless they know they can't. Except Patrick wouldn't even give me that. He barely said 10 words to me that day. Didn't ask what I was doing. Didn't notice when I overcooked the rice. Didn't comment when I skipped my evening walk. He was there in body, fully present, utterly familiar but emotionally. He was a ghost in loafers. That night, in bed, I rolled toward him and studied the lines on his face. The creases that used to deepen with laughter. The faint scar above his left eyebrow from when Nathan threw a toy truck too hard. I used to trace that scar with my fingertip while he slept. Now I didn't dare touch him. I didn't know who he was anymore. Was it guilt or fear, or had he already chosen? The next day, I tested him. Lila texted. I said casually over breakfast. She said she wants to come by this week and go through the old family recipes again. He paused, just for a second. It was almost imperceptible, the lift of his eyebrows, the way his fork paused midair, but I caught it. Nice of her, he said. She's always trying to connect with you. Trying, not succeeding. That night, I found her wedding thank you note in the bottom of my nightstand drawer. To the woman I hope to become one day, it said, you've built a marriage worth emulating. I stared at the loopy handwriting, the glossy photo of the two of them tucked behind the card. Her smile looked real. His did not. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the photo until it blurred. Then I tore the card in half. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I wasn't dealing with a petty woman or an insecure wife. I was dealing with a strategist. And if Patrick was part of it, if he had truly crossed that line, then she wasn't the only one who had underestimated me. The next morning, I made his coffee weaker than usual, just to see if he'd say something. He didn't. I burned the toast slightly. Still nothing. 3 days passed like this. Silent dance, careful moves, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. I cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. Checked expiration dates, rearranged the pantry, anything to keep my hands busy while my mind spun with possibilities. But one thing became clear, whatever this was, he wasn't going to bring it up, which meant it was up to me. And I'd already wasted enough time hoping someone else would do the right thing. I started seeing things I hadn't seen before. Or maybe I had. Maybe I just hadn't wanted to understand them. It began with the receipts, the ones I kept in a box by the phone, behind the drawer labeled takeout menus, emergency batteries. I'd gone in there looking for and instead found a stack of Patrick's recent credit card statements. Normally, I would have tossed them in the shred pile. But that day, I flipped one open. There was a charge from a boutique hotel in the city, a place we'd never stayed, never even talked about. 2 charges, actually both on weekday afternoons. Room service, minibar, valet. I sat down on the edge of the couch, staring at the numbers like they might shift into something more innocent if I just blinked enough. That same day, I remembered the spa gift card he'd given me last month out of nowhere. You deserve it, he'd said. Go pamper yourself. I'd thanked him, hugged him, and booked it for a Saturday. He'd insisted on driving me there and picking me up after. I thought it was sweet. Now I wasn't so sure. And Lila? She'd started showing up at our house more often lately. Always with some excuse, a family recipe, a quick hello, a book she thought I'd like. She'd never done that in the first year of their marriage. Suddenly, in the last few months, it was like she couldn't stay away. I remembered how she'd once brought over a tray of banana bread wrapped in a patterned tea towel. Just a little something, she'd said. I hadn't thought much of it then. But now, I realized something strange. She hated bananas. Said so on our last vacation, made a whole show about how she couldn't stand the smell. So why the banana bread? Why anything? Everything felt staged now. Like I'd been an unwitting extra in a scene she was directing. There were other signs, small ones. Patrick began putting cologne on to do yard work. He kept checking his phone while pretending not to. He used to fall asleep on the couch during the news. Now he was in bed early and up earlier, showered and dressed before I'd even pulled back the curtains. One morning, I opened the closet and found a new shirt pressed. Expensive, clearly not from one of his usual stores. I checked the label. Italian. Slim cut. A brand neither of us had ever bought. Where'd this come from? I asked at breakfast. He glanced at it and shrugged. Oh, that? A gift from a client? I nodded, pretending not to see the hesitation in his eyes, or the way he drank his coffee like it might dissolve the question in midair. That afternoon, I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot and cried for the first time since the party. Not big, cinematic tears, just quiet ones, the kind that slide down your cheek when the dam begins to leak but hasn't broken yet. Because the truth wasn't just that my husband might be sleeping with my son's wife. The truth was that I had been asleep for years. I used to think I was observant, that I understood the people around me, that I could walk into a room and feel the temperature of emotion without needing a thermometer. I'd raised a family, nursed my mother through cancer, balanced checkbooks and emotions like they were delicate china. I thought that meant I was immune to being fooled. But the thing about long marriages is that sometimes the very sameness that comforts you can also blind you. You stop asking questions because the answers are predictable. You stop listening closely because you've already memorized the dialogue. And sometimes the people you love use that silence to rewrite the story without telling you. That evening, I stood at the kitchen sink, staring out into the yard as dusk fell. The motion light flicked on, catching movement by the back fence. Patrick and Lila, just silhouettes. She was handing him something, a manila envelope. He tucked it under his arm quickly and glanced toward the house. I ducked back behind the curtain before he saw me. That was when I knew. It wasn't just guilt. It wasn't just avoidance. Something was happening, something active, coordinated, and I was on the outside of it. Later that night, when he came in from the yard, I asked him if he'd seen Lila today. He hesitated just long enough. She stopped by for a minute, he said, setting his gloves by the sink. Wanted to borrow a book. What book? He blinked. What? What book did she borrow? He stared at me for half a second too long, then shook his head. I don't remember. Something about gardens, I think. She hated gardening. She'd told me once that dirt under her nails made her feel barbaric. But I nodded anyway and turned back to the dishes. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I opened the box in the attic where I kept old calendars and planners. I traced back through appointments, dinner guests, notes, scribbled in the margins, and I started to see the pattern. Every time Patrick had a late work call, Lila had dropped by earlier that day. Every time I was out with friends, there was a corresponding charge on his card, coffee, lunch, a florist in a town neither of us had reason to visit. Every time I stopped looking, something moved forward. I stayed up until 3 a.m., listing it all in a notebook. Every inconsistency, every moment of doubt I'd brushed away. I used red pen for anything related to her, blue for him, green for anything that overlapped. By the time I finished, the page looked like a battlefield. And I knew whatever this was, it was bigger than I'd imagined. It wasn't just about cheating. It was a campaign. And I was the last one to realize I was under siege. I wasn't looking for confirmation, I was looking for peace. But peace, it turned out, had left the house weeks ago. It was late morning when I noticed her car again, Lila's. That silver coupe with the vanity plate she claimed she didn't choose herself. She always parked it like she was daring someone to say something. Slightly angled across the edge of our driveway, not blocking anything, but certainly not blending in. She hadn't rung the bell. No knock. No text. I only saw her because I was wiping down the kitchen windows and caught the reflection in the glass, a flash of movement along the hedges that lined the side yard. At first, I thought it was Patrick. But then I spotted the ponytail, the black blouse, the purse tucked under one arm like it held a secret. I stepped back from the window and waited. A few seconds later, Patrick appeared, walking toward her from the tool shed. He was holding something, gloves maybe, and wiping his hands on a rag. I stayed low and moved to the back hallway, where the curtain above the side window gave me a clearer view of the garden path without being seen. They were talking, not arguing, but close, intimate, like a scene that had been rehearsed. She reached out and touched his arm. It was the same gesture I'd seen her use on Nathan during dinner parties, that possessive, casual graze she liked to use when she was making a point in front of an audience. But this time there was no audience. Just my husband and her, standing inches apart beneath the climbing roses I planted 20 years ago. She was smiling. He wasn't. He looked tense, maybe even frightened. And yet, he didn't pull away. She said something, I couldn't hear it, but I watched his shoulders drop like someone had just relieved him of a great weight or handed him a bigger one. She leaned in slightly, lowered her voice, and handed him something. A folded paper, maybe a note. maybe a photo. I couldn't tell. He didn't read it, just shoved it in his back pocket like he'd expected it. And that was the moment I stopped breathing. Not because I was jealous, not even because I was angry, but because I realized they had choreography, they had rhythm, they had practice. When she turned to leave, Patrick didn't follow. He stood still, watching her walk down the side path, back to her car, her heels barely touching the gravel. The sun caught the edge of her sunglasses as she opened the door, slid inside, and backed out with a practiced flick of her wrist. He didn't come back inside right away. He just stood there, staring at nothing, one hand on his hip, the other still holding the rag. I went back to the kitchen and picked up the sponge like I'd never moved. A minute later, I heard the back door open, the creak of it, the thud of his steps on the floor. "Everything all right out there?" I asked without turning. "Yep," he said. "Just pruning the west side. Aphids again." I nodded and kept wiping the same spot on the counter. He didn't say anything else. That night, I couldn't focus on the book in my lap. I kept replaying the moment she'd touched his arm, the way he hadn't flinched, the ease of it, the timing, the silence, and the way he'd lied to me so easily. Aphids, pruning when I'd seen him receiving something from her hands less than 20 feet from our kitchen window. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was collusion. And if they were willing to meet in the daylight outside our own home with no effort to hide it, then I had to ask the one question that terrified me more than any other. What were they so confident I'd never find? I never used to go through other people's things, not even Nathan's when he was a boy. I believed in privacy, boundaries, trust. But trust is the first thing that dies when the lies get loud enough. It was the following Wednesday when I found the folder. Lila had come by that morning under the pretense of needing my chili recipe. "Nathan's craving it," she said, placing a manicured hand on her belly like it already belonged to the baby she swore was Patrick's. I told her to check the red binder in the guest room, the one labeled Family Recipes. It was always kept on the shelf above the dresser, next to a stack of old cookbooks and a dusty copy of Better Homes and Gardens from the 90s. I watched from the hallway as she disappeared into the room. 5 minutes passed, then 10. When I peeked in, she wasn't looking at the binder. She wasn't even near the shelf. She was standing by the dresser, her purse half-zipped, her phone in her hand. "Need help finding it?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "Oh, no. I was just texting Nathan. Found it right away." She held up the binder like a trophy and flashed me a quick smile. "Thanks, Mom." She left 5 minutes later, chili recipe in hand. That afternoon, I stood in the same room staring at the same dresser and told myself I was being paranoid. But my feet didn't listen. They moved before my conscience could intervene. I opened the top drawer. Neatly folded hand towels, a couple of floral sachets. Nothing unusual. The second drawer held spare pillowcases and one of Patrick's old flannel robes. Still smelled like cedar. The third drawer stuck a little. I had to tug it open. At first, I thought it was empty. But then I noticed it tucked behind a stack of folded linens, almost flush with the back panel. A plain manila folder, rubber banded shut, no label, no markings, just hidden. I pulled it out with both hands and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands shook as I peeled the band off. Inside were papers, dozens of them. Bank statements, loan agreements, application forms. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. The accounts were in Nathan's name, but the transactions didn't add up. Withdrawals of $6,500. One was for 12-0, all cash, all spread out over the last 8 months. The balances on the credit cards were staggering. Some of the cards I'd never even heard of. One was opened in Nathan's name just 2 months ago. I checked the application. The signature looked like his, but the email address wasn't one I recognized. And the listed phone number had a New York area code. I found a printout of an email confirmation for a high-interest personal loan, $30,000. The form was dated the same week Patrick had claimed we couldn't afford to replace the fence. I stared at the pile, heart pounding. None of this made sense. Nathan made decent money. He wasn't flashy. He didn't gamble, didn't collect expensive hobbies. So what was this? A sheet of paper fluttered loose from the stack. I caught it before it hit the floor. It was handwritten. A list. American Express, 15K signature loan, 22K emergency fund, 10K safe deposit box. Question mark Marcus? The last word was circled twice. Marcus, our gardener. I read the list again, and then again. The numbers didn't frighten me, not yet. It was the implications. The feeling that this wasn't just carelessness. It wasn't even desperation. It was a system, a cover-up. And whoever made that list, and I was almost certain it was Lila, judging by the looping capital E's and the tiny, deliberate check marks beside the first two lines, they weren't documenting damage. They were calculating leverage. I didn't realize Patrick had come home until I heard the back door close. I scrambled to reband the folder and shoved it back where I found it. My hands were clumsy. Everything felt loud, the drawer sliding, my breath, my heartbeat. I checked the room twice to make sure it looked untouched. Then I stepped out into the hallway and smoothed my cardigan. Patrick was in the kitchen, peeling an orange like it was the most normal day in the world. "You're home early," I said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Drizzled out of nowhere. Figured I'd call it a day." I nodded and opened the fridge, pretending to look for something. Anything to avoid his gaze. I could feel it now, the itch of unspoken things hovering between us. Later that night, once the lights were out and his breathing slowed beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. There were too many questions, too many holes in the story. Lila's quiet control, Patrick's passivity, Nathan's name tied to financial wreckage he knew nothing about. And now, Marcus inserted at the bottom of a list, like a footnote, a wild card. I closed my eyes and replayed the backyard encounter again. There was something more here, something I hadn't seen yet. But I was getting closer. And someone, maybe all of them, had a very good reason to make sure I didn't. Marcus always struck me as the kind of man who kept his head down. Early 30s, maybe 35. Quiet, reliable. The sort who waved from the driveway but never lingered long enough to become a presence. He came every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork, to tend the hedges and prune the rose beds. And until recently, I'd never thought much about him at all. But that changed the day I saw him talking to Lila. It was Friday morning. Patrick was out on an errand, and I was rearranging the spice rack, a task I had no real need to do, but needed to do just the same. I glanced out the kitchen window and froze. Lila's car was back, parked at the very edge of the driveway, almost like she didn't want it to be seen from the street. She wasn't coming inside. She wasn't even near the front of the house. She was in the backyard, walking directly toward Marcus, who stood by the shed raking leaves into a bin. I stepped back from the window and slid quietly into the hallway, heart thudding in my chest. From the back mudroom, I had a clear line of sight through the laundry window without being visible myself. They were talking fast, close. Her body language was sharp. She was leading the conversation, gesturing with one hand, her phone in the other. Marcus looked uncomfortable. He wasn't smiling. He kept looking around, like someone afraid to be seen. She reached into her bag and pulled out something small, flat, white, an envelope. Marcus took a step back, shook his head. Lila stepped closer. He looked around again. And then, after a moment's hesitation, he took the envelope and shoved it quickly into his jacket pocket. I didn't move, didn't blink. I just watched as the man who used to compliment my tulips in spring accepted something from the woman who'd whispered a bomb into my ear. After a few more seconds, she turned and left without another word. Marcus went back to his raking like nothing had happened. But he was paler, his movements stiffer. Something about it broke my heart more than it should have. Not because I trusted Marcus, but because whatever web Lila was spinning, it reached further than I'd thought. She wasn't just manipulating Patrick. She wasn't just bleeding Nathan. She was paying people off, buying silence, buying something. That afternoon, when Marcus came around to trim the front hedges, I brought him a glass of lemonade. I hadn't done that in years. He looked surprised to see me. Hot day, I said. You're working hard. He nodded. Yes, ma'am, just finishing up the front. I handed him the glass and held his gaze a second longer than usual. You know, Marcus, I said, you've always been so respectful. I've appreciated that. He swallowed. Thank you, ma'am. I smiled and watched him drink, watched his eyes flick to the house and back to me. Something in his posture shifted, a hesitation, like he wanted to say something but couldn't, or wasn't allowed to. You've seen a lot around here, haven't you? I asked softly. He paused again, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and said, I just take care of the yard. I nodded. Of course he did. And then he turned and walked back to the hedge, lemonade in hand. But he didn't finish trimming. He left 15 minutes later. No goodbye, no invoice, just gone. And I stood in the front doorway, watching the empty sidewalk, feeling the quiet throb of certainty. He knew something. And whatever was in that envelope, he wasn't ready to carry it. It was 2 days later when Marcus knocked on my door. That alone was enough to set my pulse racing. He'd never come to the front door before. Ever. He always entered through the side gate, let himself into the backyard, and got to work without fuss. But that Monday morning, he stood stiffly on my porch, hat in his hands, shifting from foot to foot like a man walking toward confession. I opened the door, keeping my expression neutral. Morning, I said. He cleared his throat. Do you have a minute? I stepped aside without a word. He walked in slowly, his eyes scanning the hallway like it was unfamiliar territory, which, for him, it was. I led him into the kitchen, poured him a glass of water, and waited. He didn't sit. Just stood at the counter, staring down at the condensation sliding down the glass. I didn't want to come, he said finally, but I couldn't sleep. I let the silence stretch. I saw you, I said softly, with her on Friday. He looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. I didn't ask for any of this, he said. I didn't mean for it to happen. What did she give you? He hesitated. Money. To keep quiet, to play dumb, to pretend. Pretend what? Marcus exhaled, the kind of breath that drags guilt up with it. She wanted me to say Patrick was the father, if anyone asked. It felt like the room tilted. Excuse me? He nodded. She said she needed to control the story, that there was too much riding on it, that Patrick owed her, that your family owed her. I sat down slowly, the weight of those words pressing against my spine. She told me it would be temporary, that once everything was in place, once your son was on the hook, as she put it, it wouldn't matter who the father was. I stared at him. Is it Patrick's? His jaw tensed. No, ma'am. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. I closed my eyes. I wanted to scream, or sob, or throw something. But instead, I pictured her, Lila, in my kitchen, at my son's birthday party, whispering poison in my ear like it was perfume. I opened my eyes again. How long? I asked. A few months. It was once. Stupid. We were both, I don't even know. He ran a hand down his face. She said she was lonely, said you didn't understand her, said Nathan was too distracted. I believed her, for one night. And now she's using you? He looked up, shame all over him. Yes. I stood and walked to the window. The yard outside looked exactly the same as it always had. Neatly trimmed, carefully maintained. The illusion of peace. She said if I told anyone, she'd ruin me, Marcus said behind me. Said she had texts, screenshots, things that could make it look like I forced her. Said she'd cry in court and no one would believe me. Do you have anything? Any proof? He pulled a crumpled receipt from his jacket, a printout from a lab in town. Not a DNA test, just a billing slip. Paid in cash, dated 3 weeks ago. She made me drive her there, he said. Said she wanted to get ahead of the narrative. Whatever that means. It meant she was building her escape hatch, her fallback story. She was smart. I had to give her that. But not smart enough. I took the receipt and folded it into my apron pocket. If she contacts you again, you tell me. Directly. He nodded. I'm sorry, Mrs. Aldridge. I never meant. I know. He turned to go, but paused at the door. You're the only one who's looked me in the eye in weeks, he said. That's why I came. I watched him walk down the steps and disappear around the side of the house. The sky was pale and cloudless. My roses were blooming. And for the first time since the party, I felt something new. Not grief, not fear, direction. The affair hadn't been what I thought. She hadn't been sleeping with Patrick. She just made sure everyone believed she was. Because it gave her power, protection, leverage. She knew how to use guilt like currency, shame like a weapon. But now I had something she didn't know existed. A living, breathing witness. And the story she thought she controlled, it wasn't hers anymore. The funny thing about truth is that once you start uncovering it, it has a smell, a shape, a weight. You can sense when it's close, like a thunderstorm rolling in before the sky darkens. That's how it felt the day I found the envelope. It wasn't hidden well. Not really. Which told me Lila didn't think anyone would dare go looking, or maybe she just thought I was too stupid, too old, too broken to connect the dots. She'd been over that morning, acting sweet, brought pastries from that expensive French place downtown, claimed she just wanted to check in that she'd been worried about. Patrick said he seemed distracted lately. Then she sat on my couch, rubbing her stomach like she was the Virgin Mary and not the woman who'd whispered filth in my ear 4 weeks ago. She stayed for coffee, made small talk, then asked to use the upstairs bathroom. That was her mistake. Because after she left and after I saw her car pull away from the curb, I went up to check. Not for anything in particular, just a gut feeling. The bathroom was spotless, as always. She was meticulous like that, but when I went to replace the hand towel she hadn't used, I noticed something white sticking out from behind the toilet tank. It was an envelope. Long, unmarked, slightly creased. I didn't breathe as I picked it up. Inside was a single page. Thick paper. A letterhead I recognized immediately. Gene Test Diagnostics. I'd used them once, years ago, for a family history panel. This was different. At the top, in clean clinical font, paternity test results. My eyes skipped ahead. Mother, Lila Monroe Aldridge. Child. Unborn. Fetal sample via amniocentesis. Alleged father 1. Nathan Aldridge. Excluded. Probability of paternity. 0%. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub. The words blurred for a moment. 0%. 0. I looked again. Alleged father 2. Marcus Daniel Santos, not excluded. Probability of paternity. 99.7%. I read it 3 times, and each time the numbers seemed to press deeper into my chest. She knew. She'd known all along. This wasn't about doubt. This wasn't about fear. This was about control. She'd taken that test, confirmed the truth, and then walked into my home, stared into my eyes, and let me believe the lie. Let my husband twist in silence. Let my son build his future on a child that wasn't his. And still, she smiled at me like we were girlfriends. I didn't know how long I sat there. Eventually, I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan. I didn't bother fixing the envelope, let her wonder where she lost it, let her panic when she realized it was gone. That, I thought, would be the beginning of her unraveling. That evening, I waited for Patrick to go upstairs before I pulled out the document again. I spread it across the kitchen table like a crime scene photo. Because that's what it was. Evidence. But not just of betrayal, of strategy. She had kept the proof, hidden it, not destroyed it, because she wanted options, leverage, a backup plan in case things didn't go her way. A chance to cry on cue and say Patrick had manipulated her, that she'd been confused, vulnerable, taken advantage of by an older man with too much influence. She wanted every angle covered, every narrative preloaded. She wasn't just cruel, she was prepared. And I'd spent too many years preparing meals, preparing my son's future, preparing Patrick's retirement plan, to not recognize a woman, preparing a weapon. That night, Patrick came back downstairs after brushing his teeth. He looked at me like he wanted to speak, but didn't know how. I watched him stand in the doorway, fingers twitching like a child about to confess something too big to carry alone. Bess, he said quietly. I know, I said. He blinked. What? I reached into my pocket and slid the test across the table. He stared at it. The color drained from his face. She left it upstairs, I said. I suppose she didn't think I'd be the one to find it. He looked like he might collapse. I didn't touch her, he whispered. I swear to you, Bess. I let her spin the story. I let Nathan think what he needed to. I thought I could handle it. But you didn't, I said. You let her turn this house into a stage. He nodded, wordless. I sat back and let the silence settle between us. Not angry. Not yet. Not anymore. Because now I had what I needed, the truth, the evidence, and a decision to make. I wasn't going to confront her with rage. That would be giving her exactly what she wanted to show, a scene, a reason to play victim. No. When the curtain rose again, it would be my story on stage. And this time, she wouldn't be the one holding the script. I hosted the next birthday party like I always did. This time it was for Patrick, 69. A modest gathering, just family and a few old friends. The kind of afternoon where the napkins are cloth, the cake is homemade, and the wine is opened a little too early. Lila offered to help with the setup, of course. Showed up an hour early in a pale blue dress that hugged her body like an alibi. Her hair was curled, her makeup soft. One hand rested on her belly as she stepped through the door with a gift bag in the other, and that smile she always wore like armor. Where do you want the plates? She asked. By the cake stand, I said. Thank you, sweetheart. Her eyes flicked up for just a second, suspicious, then warm again. The guests arrived in waves. Patrick stayed mostly quiet, greeting people with a practiced smile. Nathan was radiant, practically glowing as he talked about nursery colors and bottle warmers. He bent to kiss Lila's stomach every so often, and each time I watched her flinch just slightly before recovering. I didn't rush. I made sure everyone had cake, that the music was soft and unobtrusive, that every guest had something to drink, something to nibble. I floated between conversations like it was any other Sunday. Because that's what power looks like, you see. It isn't loud, it's composed. Lila grew uneasy about halfway through the meal. I saw it in the way she kept checking her phone, in the way she overcorrected her tone when Nathan made a joke and she forgot to laugh. I hadn't said a word out of place, hadn't looked at her with anything other than mild affection. And still she knew. Predators can always sense the shift when they're no longer the most dangerous thing in the room. When the time was right, dessert plates cleared, coffee served, I clinked my glass once. Everyone turned. I just wanted to say a few words, I began. About family, about legacy, about truth. Nathan smiled. Lila froze. Patrick, happy birthday, darling. You've weathered many storms, and today I want to thank you for letting me steer through this one. He looked down, jaw tight. I've been thinking a lot about the future, I continued. About the baby we're all so excited to welcome. About the bloodlines we pass on. The stories. The names. Nathan nodded, a little confused. And how important it is, I said gently, to know where we come from. To know who we come from. I turned to Lila. Which is why I thought we'd share something today that might bring some clarity. I reached behind me and pulled the envelope from the sideboard drawer, the same unmarked envelope she'd hidden upstairs. I laid it on the table, no flourish, just finality. Nathan looked at it, then at me. What's this? He asked. Lila had gone still. Her hand gripped the edge of the table. I looked at my son and softened. It's about the baby, Nathan. What do you mean? It's a paternity test, I said. One Lila took weeks ago. He blinked, confused, then shook his head. Why would she? She knew, I said. She's known. Since the beginning. Nathan reached for the envelope, pulled out the paper, scanned it quickly. His face fell in slow motion. His mouth opened, then shut again, like he was trying to find the oxygen that had just been ripped from the room. Marcus? He said. What is this? I didn't want you to find out like this, Lila said quickly. Her voice cracked, perfectly timed. I was scared. I didn't know how to. You told me it was mine. I thought it was, at first. You told Mom it was Dad's. That silenced her. Everyone was staring now. Patrick kept his eyes down. I was going to tell you, she whispered. I needed to be sure you'd stay. Stay? Nathan's voice was ragged. You manipulated my entire family. I needed protection. You don't know what it's like to be alone, to be pregnant and not know if the father will claim. You knew, I said sharply. You had proof. You let this play out on purpose. I made one mistake, she said, eyes darting. One night, and I've been paying for it ever since. I tilted my head. No, dear. You made 100 choices, calculated ones. You built a lie, thread by thread, and then handed it to my son like it was a future. She stood up. I'm not doing this here. You already did. She looked at Nathan. Please, say something. He stood too, slowly. His face had changed. Not anger, not sadness, just vacancy. I think you should leave, he said. She stared at him. Now, he added. Lila blinked. Once. Twice. Then grabbed her purse and walked out without another word. No one moved. Eventually, Patrick reached over and squeezed my hand. The room exhaled, and I smiled the same way she had at the beginning. Except this time it wasn't a mask, it was closure. After Lila left, life didn't snap back to normal. There was no grand parade, no closing credits, no apology bouquet, just quiet. Long silences in the morning, the hum of the refrigerator, the rattle of the mailbox, and the sound of my son moving through our house like a man trying to remember how to breathe. He stayed with us for a week, ate toast without butter, slept late, stared into coffee mugs like they might offer answers. He didn't talk much, and I didn't press. Grief has its own rhythm. So does shame. He had to walk through both. Patrick didn't say it out loud, but I knew what he was thinking. Every time he looked at me, I could see it. Regret, gratitude, relief, guilt. I let him sit with all of it. He was never cruel, never careless, just weak in the moments that mattered most. And sometimes weakness costs more than betrayal. But I didn't destroy him. I didn't destroy any of them. Because that's not who I am. I'm the woman who opened the door to her enemy and served her tea, who held her tongue while lies bloomed in her garden, who listened, watched, waited, and then, when it mattered, told the truth. Not for vengeance, for clarity. A month after the party, Nathan started attending therapy. He didn't tell me. I found the card in his coat pocket when I was doing laundry. I smiled and folded it back into place. 3 months later, he met someone new. A nurse. Kind eyes. Soft voice. Real. Patrick and I began again slowly. Not because I forgot, but because I remembered everything and chose to stay anyway. Forgiveness isn't a door you walk through. It's a room you clean out piece by piece. And Lila? I heard she moved back to her sister's in Vermont. The baby came early, healthy, dark-haired, no last name shared. I keep the DNA test in a drawer, not as a trophy, as a reminder of the line I didn't cross, of the woman I refused to become. Because anyone can scream, anyone can throw a glass across the room. But it takes something else entirely to stand still while the storm builds and wait for your moment to speak. And when you do, speak so clearly that no one ever dares to lie to you again. Now I'm curious about you. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever gone through something like this? Let me know in the comments. And while you're here, I've left 2 of my other stories on screen. I promise they'll surprise you. Thanks for watching all the way to the end.